Welcome to Financial Freedom with the Flipping Flanagans, where we help real estate agents and already successful business professionals create legacy wealth through real estate. We go by the Flipping Flanagans, and we don't actually flip houses very often. When you drop the F bomb a little too often, add that to a real estate background, you get the Flipping Flanagans. We actually buy property to hold and see long-term gains protected from inflation while seeing amazing benefits from appreciation and depreciation. See you on the other side. Hello again. We are back and live with Crystal McDonough. She actually met my husband and I at the Evergreen, Colorado Chamber of Commerce. We were at an event together, and she's an attorney. And Crystal, I'll let you kind of introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your company and what you do.
Sure. Yeah, I'm an attorney. I'm the owner and founder of McDounough Law Group. We have 7 offices between Wyoming, Colorado, and Texas. And we also have attorneys spread out around the country. So we work with clients really around the country in all kinds of business and corporate law, natural resources, real estate, mergers and acquisitions. Really, we do a lot of work. We're almost a general practice firm. We specialize in a lot of areas. We have estate planners, we have litigators, we have there are all kinds of different attorneys doing all kinds of different things. So we can pretty much cover all of our clients' needs.
Yes. So we obviously were drawn because you mentioned estate planning and real estate, which are two things that Brad and I focus on, and we live and breathe real estate. And as we work with different people and they grow their portfolios, you start to have more wealth that you're dealing with and more assets that you're trying to protect. And things happen, lawsuits happen. And so really, we wanted to get this conversation going, just kind of strategizing, what does that look like when you're trying to protect your assets as a real estate investor and as you scale? Because I think what's hard is the advice that you get at the beginning of your journey is very different than the advice you're going to get mid and later in your journey, because your assets grow and the needs, I mean, from a law standpoint, the needs really do change. And so I think some people will hold on to what they found out in the very beginning, and then they stick to that. Well, my attorney told me this in the beginning, and it's like, well, you have to evolve because your business evolved. So we'll just kind of jump right in. I've got a couple of questions here, and Brad, feel free to jump in if you have anything to add to what I just mentioned. So I'd say let's start at the real estate side of things. And something I would love to ask you is, so are there any specific permits or licenses required for certain types of properties or businesses when we are considering adding to our portfolio? And how can we ensure compliance with the requirements?
So when you're looking at adding new real estate to your portfolio, really you need to look at where the real estate is located. So each state is going to have specific laws. Then you're going to need to look at the county and the cities. Depends on what purpose the real estate is going to serve. Is it going to just be held and for future use or for future sale? Is it going to be a fix and flip? Is it going to be a rental property? Is it going to be some other investment for some other purpose? Is it going to be VRBO? You have to know what the purpose of the real estate is. Then you can really dial in to look and see what the regulatory framework looks like for that specific location. We always start with the state, then we look at the county and the city. Then we can understand better what is required for that.
So I love that. So I started with that question because we obviously have, and I don't know, you don't know a whole lot about our portfolio, but we've got a little bit of everything. We've done some fix and flip. We've done VRBO, Airbnb style properties and short-term rental. We've done midterm rentals with travel nurses. And then we've got long-term hold stuff. And as we've kind of we've gone from holding most of our real estate in Nebraska, then we added Colorado, and then we added Arizona. And so a lot of times our clients will come to us and ask, we'd love to buy a property in Colorado and send me a property. Well, that property might be in a jurisdiction that doesn't allow short-term rental, or it's required to be your primary residence. And so really understanding and working with professionals that understand and know where to go to find the information, I think is very, very, very important. I actually had a guy that was referred to me here in Nebraska. We had a conversation and he's like, oh, one of the, real estate investor, like a mass email type thing. He got synced up with one of their agents and they sent him a property. And I was like, the numbers definitely make sense on short-term rental, but you're not allowed to short-term rental there. So good luck with that.
Well, and the problem with short-term rentals is that's a constant moving target. So, what rules are in place now may not be the same rules in place in 6 months. It seems like those rules are always in flux. And I mean, even I get, I'm on some listservs where we're constantly being updated on different counties and cities' rules. And there's always complaints and there's always things that are coming in. And so when you get new city council members, they might bring new issues that they wanted and rules they want to change because there's just so much going on with short-term rentals. And there's some controversy when it's in residential neighborhoods. And so then you've got HOAs that you have to deal with. So it might not even be the county or the city that is regulating it. It might even be having to drill down further into the covenants of an HOA. And that's recorded with the county clerk and recorder usually. So you'll have to dive in sometimes even deeper to find out what the HOAs allow.
Yes.
Yeah, anytime an industry, I guess, is in its infancy or evolving, it's absolutely a little bit of a risk that you take to start participating. And then you have to be open or adaptable to change so that you can continue to achieve the goal with all of the challenges that I guess come our way. So do you, for those that might be curious, because of course the CC&Rs are not necessarily, or the covenants are not always written in a way that the layperson would interpret, is that ever a service that a prospective investor or purchaser can solicit from you as some review of a particular project during their due diligence periods?
Oh yeah, I would always recommend due diligence, looking at HOA covenants, looking at any other, I mean, if there is an HOA in place, it may not even be in the covenants. It might be in some separate rules that the HOA board has put forward that's been voted on by either the board or the members. It might be in their minutes and resolutions. So sometimes you have to kind of dig deep and look in some of those buried layers because it's not obvious. And that can be kind of a frustrating process prior to purchasing a property. Because if you're getting ready to lay out a lot of cash or a lot of investment to buy a property, a lot of times you don't want to spend a ton of money up front doing due diligence if you're not going to buy the property. So you have to, I know a lot of the investors that we work with are sometimes weighing the cost benefit of doing some of the due diligence, because if they are able to be flexible and can pivot after they've purchased, say if the rules have changed and they can't do short-term rental anymore, but they could do long-term, and either way they're comfortable, the numbers work on the ROI, they just need a path forward. It really kind of depends on what the investors' needs are and what their goals are. But I always recommend doing due diligence before purchasing an investment property. My plan and my recommendation is always know what you're getting into first. It's better to know rather than have surprises down the road, because surprises can be costly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it's talking about the short-term rental thing and like the having options. It's been coming up in conversation too lately. So we have several furnished units that went from Airbnb now midterm. And something that I like about that is if I ever decided to sell or we decided to sell the property, they're already furnished and like staged. So I'm like, it's nice for an investor if you are looking at that option, if you stay fluid and you're like, okay, if this doesn't work out or the rules do change, buy a property that has the good location. Usually short-term rentals that do really well are usually in a good location too. They're walking distance to, to different places or whatever. Or like in Colorado, there's an attraction piece to them. So usually they're pretty easy to resell if you're doing it right. So that brings me to my next question is, so this is advice that we got early on. And so full disclosure, like putting your properties in every single one in a different LLC. Well, when all of a sudden you have 15 properties and you're trying to buy quickly, or you're getting a deal and you're trying to assign it to which one's going to make the most sense, and then you're managing, an LLC for, just a couple properties or one property per LLC. What is your kind of take on that, and how, what do you recommend, or how does that?
So for liability purposes, I usually recommend that each property be in an individual LLC or an individual entity, just because if you are building a real estate portfolio, you need to do whatever you can from the legal perspective to protect your liability, protect your other assets in case there was ever an issue with that one particular property. So it's best practice, in my opinion. Other people might have a different perspective on that, but I usually recommend to my clients that we put each property in its own individual entity. In the past, in the typical flow of those LLCs is you have one parent LLC that owns all of the child LLCs or all multiple other LLCs, so that the money can all flow to one LLC at the top, and you can kind of manage that way. That's been the traditional, holding company with child companies underneath it, held and owned by it. That's been the traditional model over the years, since the formation and existence of LLCs. But in recent years, there's been a new LLC model that I really like that's popped up. About half the states in the country have adopted this type of LLC model, and other states are moving this direction as well. It's called a series LLC. And for real estate investors, I really like it, especially if you're just starting out, because we can really get your structure set up from the get-go, from the very beginning, with this parent-child company model, where the traditional route of having an LLC holding company that owns multiple LLCs can be a little bit cumbersome because each LLC is its own complete legal entity.
Mm-hmm.
So you end up, even if you have the parent holding company LLC with all the child LLCs under the traditional model, you still end up having to manage each LLC separately. They all have their own, all of the typical things that would come along with owning an individual company. Under the series model, we've been able to streamline, under the statutes for those series, streamline a lot of the paperwork, the legal documentation and paperwork, to make that flow a little simpler, especially for real estate investors that could have 50, 60, 70 properties, or even 10 properties. It doesn't really matter. The process is the same. So if we can streamline and simplify just a little bit, and it takes a little bit of effort and time off your plate and expense, then it makes sense to do that. The best way I could describe that is, if you, when you all get together, let's say you've got a group of friends that you all get together and you do things together, you all share common interests, common goals, things like that. Those are friendships that have a lot of commonalities. It's kind of similar with a parent-child, the traditional LLC relationship. There's commonalities, there's a common ownership. When you have this series LLC option, the series really truly dives into the DNA and not just a common interest. The DNA becomes one parent LLC that owns separate series entities. So it's one LLC, and then you have an individual series that is holding all the individual properties. So it's all under one entity framework, and each series can own and hold each individual property. So from a paperwork and from just from purely a management perspective, I really like these series LLCs. We've even taken some clients who've said, we've got LLCs all over the country. We've got LLCs here and there. We've got these LLCs. We need to get organized. We need to try to bring this together. We've been doing a lot of reorganization for a lot of real estate developers to clean up their assets, organize them, and streamline the flow. You still have to have separate bank accounts. You still have to file the taxes. There's still some of that traditional things you have to do. But now even some of the banks are offering some services that streamline the banking for these series LLCs. So that's even one more step that can be made functionally easier when you're managing dozens of properties. So it can be cumbersome. I mean, there's no doubt. We're trying to protect liability, and on the other side, we're creating more work for management.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a double-edged sword, but I would always rather have the liability protection in place with the one entity, one series, one LLC owning the property, rather than have you exposed to liability.
That makes
That's
sense.
a long answer.
No, that's good. It's really good. And it's helpful because that's honestly where we came. It's like when you have your CPA and your banks and everyone has, because you're protecting the legal side of it.
Mm-hmm.
CPA is trying to protect your, from the IRS, make sure that you're
financially,
financially set correctly. And then you've got the banks who want things to look a certain way. So it's, to get everyone on the same page is one of the hardest things, I think, of being a real estate investor.
Especially as things grow, the proficiency and the ability of the advisor, because you're the legal advisor, you've got your tax advisor, your bank advisor,
your insurance advisor, you got to have the insurance.
Yeah.
and so bringing them all together and having them all be proficient enough to that the banker might be extremely complex, but if the CPA isn't, all of a sudden there's not a congruent relationship there. So and if we're probably trying to narrow it down, I would say single family residential and like smaller multifamily residential. We're not talking 100 units. The majority of the people who we speak to are more practitioners that on the side use their success in usually real estate or banking or some area that's aligned with real estate. They're using their funds to create this like retirement plan or go vacation but generate income. So we're not talking overly complex. Can a trust fit into that model with either series LLCs, independent LLCs? And do you have some general framework where you start your consultation with a prospective client?
So we always start with what the goals of the client are.
Okay.
And because I want to know when I start working with a client who is either has an existing real estate portfolio or is building and getting started with their real estate portfolio, I want to know what their short-term goals are, their long-term goals, and their midterm goals. Because as life goes on and things change, you want to make sure the plan you put in place has the flexibility to grow and change with it. So nothing is a one size fits all when we're working with an investor. Everyone is different. Everyone's family situation is different. Everyone's portfolio is different. Their goals are different. So the first thing is just really to find out what their goals are. Once I know what their goals are, then we can start structuring something that's really tailored specifically to them. Sometimes that's a combination of independent LLCs, trusts, series LLCs. Maybe we don't do a series at all. Maybe we're using independent LLCs. Maybe we're looking at more of a corporate structure instead of an LLC. Depends on what their goals are and what their tax situation looks like. That plays into it big. won't typically go into a situation with a client where we're working with them to help them put their framework together or reorganize unless we are working with their financial advisors and CPAs, because is a tax implication to everything you touch in real estate. So you've got to make sure that your attorney and your financial and tax advisors are all on the same page working together. Because if not, then it can create inadvertent tax liability or inadvertent legal liability. And you don't want to get into either of those situations. So
No.
that's really how I begin looking at these things is from that perspective.
So if somebody were to have like just a couple properties starting out, would you recommend starting to do estate planning even at that early stage of just a few properties?
Absolutely. Because if you're not looking at a succession plan and having a personal estate plan, you need both. You need a business succession plan and you need your personal estate plan. If something happens to you, who's going to manage those properties? First of all.
And probate's no fun. I know that.
No, if you have say 5 properties and it's a mix between VRBO and short-term or long-term tenants, something happens to you, even let's just say that you were in a car accident and you were maybe incapacitated for a few months and you couldn't manage them. Who's going to help? Who's going to step in to manage that? Because I've been in real estate myself. We've had investment properties ourselves. And I know that at any moment, something can come up. There can be a pipe that bursts. There can be a big storm, a hailstorm, and all of a sudden you've got flooding in the basement. There's just always something that comes up with a property. So you've got to have some plan in place. And if you don't have that plan, it can kind of wreak havoc on everything. And then, if something happens and you die prematurely, which is always never something we want to talk about, because none of us ever want to think about
right.
that moment, right? We want to just go on living forever and enjoying life and doing all these things we do. But we have to have those conversations, because if we don't, then what would happen to this portfolio that we've built and all of the people that rely on it, people who are living in those homes or maybe working in those locations if you own commercial real estate. If it's short-term rental, you've got a whole nother set of issues you have to deal with. If you have children, how are they going to be taken care of? How are the assets going to be managed for their benefit? There's just so many things that you have to think about. So you really should have both a business succession plan and your personal estate plan. But they do coordinate and they go together. They go hand in hand.
So now you have my brain going. Think about like people with like, we don't have hundreds and hundreds of units, but I'm like, oh my gosh. Something to think about as you keep scaling.
Yeah.
Let me go back to the notes here. And
if you are open to it, while I interject, sometimes you'll hear about a structure where you create a company that owns everything, and then that company leases to the other company in order to mitigate risk. Do you have an opinion on that? Is that hearsay or a myth?
We do that. That also depends on what the goals and the purposes are for those properties. So, and it also goes back into the tax planning. So I do that sometimes in certain situations, but it all depends. And I know everybody hates to hear this, and it's probably the lawyer's most common phrase. It depends. Probably
everything's subjective.
Dozen more times. Yeah, because it's so specific on the tax liability, the goals, and the liability exposure, the legal liability exposure. So yes, you could lease it back. We do it sometimes, depending on what the situation is. Sometimes it's held in an independent LLC. Really just.
It's interesting because it is like your tax liability changes every single year. So what you started buying property, like if you when we started, it was like depreciation was huge. Well, the goal is then to have enough income that you can essentially retire, use your rental income. Well, that changes how you're taxed, because now you're being taxed on your rental income because you got it up to a certain amount. So it's like you have to play every year. You have to, and not even every year, like quarterly, reevaluate, where is this sitting and what does this look like now and
And
currently.
that's why it is really important to have a tax plan in place if you can, as early as you can. And it's never, I mean, even if you didn't get a tax plan, and I don't know what your situation is, but this is just for anyone in general who is investing in real estate. If somebody is invested in real estate 10 years ago and didn't have a tax plan, they should do it now. They should go ahead, get a tax plan, start looking ahead, and look at what they've done, what their options are, so that they know ahead of time. I've had clients who've come to us and said, well, I need to sell this rental property because we've got this opportunity over here or this opportunity here. But the way that they structured it when they first purchased the property 10 years ago, there's going to be a tax liability associated with liquidating that property. And so you always need to be thinking ahead. So if you can get that tax plan in place now, then you can look ahead to what those future goals are. And it's a moving target. So you should, every few years, you should be having an assessment done, looking at your taxes, have that evaluated, look at your tax planning, look at your business structure, make sure that it's still functioning the way that it needs to, make sure that the flexibility is still there. Look at your insurance, make sure you still have all of the right insurances, double check your coverages. Do you have enough? Because as you know, with the economy, you can be underinsured within 6 months.
Yep.
As depending on the way the market is and prices. So, making sure you're always properly insured. It's just good to always do a reevaluation and have your team in place so that you can call on them and make sure you're looking at this every few years at the very least.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So when we first met, this was one of the biggest questions, and I forgot about it until just now. We talked about doing business planning using a different state. And something Brad and I asked you was like, do you have to live or own property in that state in order to have you can go into this more, because this is something that was new to me, at least. I don't know about Brad, but it was definitely a new concept that we were like, "Ooh, I like that." So tell us a little bit more about like picking which state you're gonna do the planning in.
So I think when we were having that conversation, we were talking about, we hear a lot of chatter online and in different places about Wyoming trusts, Nevada trusts, and a few other states that offer asset protection trusts and different types of options and planning for individuals and for companies. And I think we were also talking about states that are really good to do business in. Nevada comes up a lot, Delaware, Wyoming, a couple other states. And I find, I'm licensed in Wyoming and Colorado, so I do a lot of work between both states. And what I've found is a lot of our clients come to us specifically because they want the benefits of having their companies in Wyoming, based in Wyoming, formed in Wyoming. They want to have trust in Wyoming. And so we work with a lot of our clients on that. So it depends on what assets you have, where they are, what your planning objectives are, whether something in another state makes sense. And then you have to look at what are the rules in that state to make sure that you meet all of those requirements to do that. I do a fair amount of planning in Wyoming. So many of my clients have at least one LLC in Wyoming. I mean, I would say a very huge percentage of my clients, probably 85% of my clients, have at least one LLC in Wyoming. And we're just doing more and more planning in Wyoming. It's a really good, friendly business environment. The laws surrounding LLCs and taxes. Wyoming does not have corporate tax. So that's a big plus for a lot of companies. And so there's a lot of pros and cons. And again, it just kind of goes back to your specific situation. But yes, we do planning. I do planning in Wyoming a lot for my clients, even if they don't live there, because there may be some benefit to that as long as they meet some of the specific state requirements.
So if you own an LLC in Wyoming and the property and the assets that it holds are in, let's say, Nebraska, that's okay. It's allowed, right? A company from Florida can own a property in wherever.
Yes.
Same thing. Okay.
Yep. And as long as you're following the rules for each state as far as doing business. So if you form an entity in Wyoming, or if you form it in another state, and that entity, let's say you're going to form an LLC in Wyoming, for example, that LLC is going to own property in Colorado. Well, then in Colorado, you would need to register that LLC as a foreign entity doing business in Colorado. And each state has different rules about foreign entities and what constitutes doing business and what is not. So there might be some activities that are not considered doing business and you don't have to register as a foreign entity. And then there are some activities that are considered doing business, so you would be required. There's just so many legal layers that people don't think about. They think, I'm going to buy a rental property. I'm going to start planning on my retirement and bringing in residual income and building this plan. And it's a great plan. But then when you start drilling down into it, there's a lot of layers you have to really consider.
Yeah. And I think it's neat having this conversation. And again, for everybody listening, like definitely get in touch with Crystal and her team, because they're even just having the initial conversation to decide, is the property going to accomplish the goal that I'm trying to accomplish? And I think so. It's like, so often I joke with people all the time, and I'm sure they're like, you guys can comment on here if you're one of them, but people so often will reach out about buying property in Florida and it's like one of their first rental properties. And I struggle with that a little bit because we don't have a lot of direct flights to Florida. So like if something goes wrong and you don't have connections there to immediately get to the property, like, is that the best first choice? Maybe buying closer to home so you can learn, the nuances and like what went wrong. And then, that's Brad and I bought in Nebraska first. And then we were like, okay, let's try our hand at Colorado and see if we can manage this from a distance. And worst case scenario, we're one flight away and an hour and a half up the mountain. Like worst case scenario, we can get there pretty quick unless, snow in the mountains sometimes can have other plans. But I just think you have to really think about these things other than just like, oh, it'd be really cool to have a property there. And there are some other things that go along with that, and legal stuff too, especially.
Oh yeah. So I have some experience in Florida. Just my parents had a condo in Florida and we just recently sold it. But the rules in Florida and each county is different. And my parents' condo was down in the Keys, and just to be able to rent their condo out, we had to go through, there's so many rules and regulations and so many things you had to comply with. And we were just doing it as family, right? I wasn't acting as a lawyer. I'm not licensed in Florida. I was just doing my own and my own stuff with our family's condo and going through all that compliance and filling out all the paperwork. And it is a lot. I mean, people don't think sometimes, especially if you're going to a destination like that, all of the extra rules that there could be. There's a lot. Florida's an interesting place to have rental property.
I would agree.
Just from personal experience.
Yes. I hear lots of stories. It's fun. We have lots of friends that have places in Florida, and we get
I love it.
It's beautiful, but it's funny because I'm like, oh my gosh, some of the things that they've gone through with the hurricanes and trying to get insurance, and just you have a different level of commitment when you invest in a market that's a little bit, it's just, there's more that goes into it.
But there's also a lot of benefit having a rental property in Florida. I mean, yes, it's definitely a cost time benefit.
Yes, exactly. I think that was that's all the questions I really had for today. I want to definitely keep this short so keep people's attention, but I would love to have a follow-up interview as we get questions after people listen to this. If you'd be willing, we can schedule another follow-up time. Brad, do you have any other quick questions for Crystal?
No, again, the same. I hope to even come up with some very applicable scenarios and maybe go through some more experiences directly and then use those as kind of like case studies and share, because there are so many similar experiences in the journey for investors that anytime we can help share, because you learn through the experience. It's generally tuition, as I would call it. It's a higher education, and oftentimes has costs associated with it. So if we could share that and continue to share that, I think that's one of the most beneficial ways to learn.
Yes. So thank you so much, Crystal. So Crystal's links to all of her company information will be in the details below. So you guys are welcome to click on that, get in touch with Crystal, follow her, get in touch with her, and definitely get your legal life in order with Crystal, because I know just from the few conversations we've had, she's a badass at what she does. So I couldn't go the whole podcast without swearing. Not possible.
Team. I mean, honestly, we've got such a great team. I couldn't do it all by myself, to be honest. We're really fortunate to have a great group of people that know what they're doing, have tons of experience, and really are great advisors for our clients.
And it's cool. When we connected with Crystal, I meant to say this at the beginning, but it was so wild, our journeys, because we had both, you guys have listened to this before, but we've both like homeschooled we remote schooled, and Crystal homeschooled her kids, and they come from the BMX life. So she's traveled all over, did the camper. Like, it was super cool to meet Crystal and be like, oh my gosh, like how are our paths so aligned with what our lives have been doing? And our kids are back in real school now, and it's been a struggle for me. They like it, but I'm like, I miss the being able to get up and leave at any given time to go do BMX, to do cheer competitions, whatever it is. So I think it's pretty awesome when the universe aligns you with very like-minded people.
Yeah, I'm definitely not your typical lawyer. I do that right now. Yeah, I love traveling. I miss it. We don't travel anymore with our kids because they're all grown mostly now, and I've got one out of the house and one almost out of the house, getting ready to graduate college, and then senior in high school this year. So we're on a whole new adventure now.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Oh, I can't even imagine. Oh, that's crazy to think about.
Well, it's crazy for me to think about.
Yeah. So thank you so much again. And again, you'll have all of her contact information in the notes below. All
right. It was great talking to you all.
You too.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. We hope you'll hit that subscribe button to stay in touch. Also, join our Facebook group at Building Legacy Wealth Through Real Estate to find out more about what we do and what we offer. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.